Welcome to week 12 of Explore the Bible. Just 2 more Sundays left in the quarter. Hope you're looking forward to this passage because, boy, this is one that's a famous passage about a guy that we think about a lot. We named him Doubting Thomas. He's like a lot of people, right? He's pretty normal in that vein. But we're going to look at this great passage out of John chapter 20 today. Before we dive into that, be sure and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Click that little button down there to subscribe. Comment, share, like the video. It helps us when you do that. And if you want to give to help support what we're doing, go to this website at give.exposedtochrist.com and you can help support the ministry that we have here. Let's look at John chapter 20. It says, when it was evening of that first day of the week, the disciples were gathered together with the doors locked because they feared the Jews. And Jesus came, stood among them, and said to them, "Peace be with you." Having said this, he showed them his hands and his side. So the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Okay, so in the evening of that first day, Jesus appears to the disciples in the upper room. It appears that he just appears. If that makes sense or not, but it seems that he just shows up, that he just happens, he's just in the room suddenly. And he says to them, "Peace be with you." In other words, don't be afraid. Almost the same thing an angel would say when they show up, right? And then he shows them his hands and his side, and the disciples rejoice. Now, there have been some things that have already happened here, okay? He's already appeared to Mary Magdalene. He's appeared to some other women. It seems that he's probably also already appeared to Peter alone, and then to the Emmaus disciples. It seems that he's already appeared to them. And disciples have been to, Peter and John have been to the tomb and seen it empty. The women have been there and seen it empty. So now he appears to all of them. And yet there's still maybe a little bit of, what is this? That's why it says he shows them his hands and his side. I think we think about that often at the end of this story, but we ought to see that here too, that even the disciples that were there in the room when he first appeared to all of them, he showed them his hands and his side. Okay, there's something to that. Maybe we'll come back to that. So then Jesus says to them again, "Peace to you, as the Father has sent me, I also send you." So here we go. He showed them his hands and his side. They rejoiced when they saw the Lord. And then he says to them again, "Peace." Okay, maybe they didn't quite hear it the first time. Maybe they were so scared they didn't know. Maybe he needed to say it again. But as the Father has sent me, I also send you. Right here off the bat, Jesus is making statements that he's going to echo over and over and over again, and certainly at the end of his earthly time here in Acts chapter 1, Matthew chapter 28, we see this sending out, right? After saying this, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." So this is a kind of a tough passage to get, right? What's going on here? Because we have Pentecost that comes after the ascension. Then we have the day of Pentecost that comes when the Holy Spirit comes on everyone. And yet we have this where it says Jesus breathed on them and then said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." So are they receiving the Holy Spirit through the breath of Jesus, or is he giving them this indication of what the presence of the Holy Spirit will be like, this breath, the breath of God in a sense, right? And then telling them, here's the way it will be, that you have the ability to forgive people. And it's not that they forgive, but you have the opportunity to offer forgiveness, right? You offer forgiveness to people and they can receive forgiveness. And if you don't offer forgiveness, retain the sins, then they're retained. They won't be forgiven. This great responsibility that the disciples had in the ministry of forgiveness and what Paul talks about, the ministry of reconciliation. So I'm going to go with this. They didn't receive the Holy Spirit then. There was this sense of the Holy Spirit will come like breath, like wind, right? We hear that, right? He is the breath of God. And then this, when I'm sending you and you have this responsibility of forgiveness, of offering forgiveness, they need to hear forgiveness from you. It says, "But Thomas, called Twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples were telling him, 'We've seen the Lord.'" So Thomas wasn't there. He wasn't in the meeting for some reason. He didn't make it. And so when they see him, they're like, "We've seen the Lord." But he says to them, "Well, if I don't see the mark of the nails in his hands, put my finger into the mark of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will never believe." Now we'll go back here. And Jesus showed them his hands and his side. But here Thomas says, I must see the mark, put my finger into the mark, put my hand into his side. I need more. I need more here. Now, there's reason for Thomas to believe. You know, his friends, who he trusted, who he spent time with, well, they're giving him testimony. And there have been multiple appearances, multiple witnesses to see Jesus already that day, right? And clearly the tomb is empty, so he's got reasons to believe, but why doesn't he? What's going on? Why is it that Thomas doesn't believe? What is it that is keeping him from this point? Let's say there's a difference between doubt and unbelief, right? You can have reasonable doubt where this is so far outside of my lived experience, I just can't believe this. This doesn't make sense. I need more evidence. There's not enough evidence for me to believe. Maybe it's just hard to believe because it's just so crazy. I mean, nobody's ever, right, in all of history, ever done this. Not since has anyone done it. What do you mean? This is so far outside. So how do you answer this, a person who has reasonable doubts? Well, one thing is we give them the proof of faith. Those, as we think about today, the way people lived following that, how they sacrificed their lives. They died for this, and nobody dies for a lie, right? We have multiple appearances of Jesus, and then we actually have multiple records of the resurrection, the report of the resurrection. There are other historical records that talk about this, right? So we've got some things like that, and of course we know he was dead, so those that claim he didn't die, well, that's the reason that he's in the tomb for 3 days and not 20 minutes, right? He died. He was clearly dead. He was buried. So we know that he was dead. There were soldiers there, so this proof of death is there. And the empty tomb, well, there's proof of life. The tomb's empty. Many people saw him. The way people lived their lives differently after that, the historical records we have, there's proof that should get rid of reasonable doubt. So then, well, I could see how it could be hard to believe, but how could you have reasonable doubt still? There's so much evidence. Maybe it's just unbelief. And unbelief is this a moral decision to refuse to believe the evidence, to refuse to believe that which is reasonable to believe given all the evidence. So it may seem unreasonable for someone to just say it, but you see all the evidence makes it a reasonable belief because it fits within this idea. It erases all reasonable doubt. So the only reason you have doubt now is not because there's not enough evidence, but because you're just hard-hearted and you refuse to believe, or you don't want to believe because you see the implications that if Jesus is risen from the dead, then I have to follow him because he must be Lord. And if I follow him, then I can't live the way I'm living now. Right? Okay, let's go on. A week later, his disciples were indoors again, and Thomas was with them. Even though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." So this entrance, like it was before, same words as before. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Don't be faithless, but believe." Look, he tells him, put your finger here. He doesn't just say, like here, I show. Here he says, you can put your finger in. Put your hand, which is what Thomas had said, right? Unless I'm able to do this. And so then Jesus says, don't be faithless, but believe. Here it is this Jesus' challenge to him. Don't continue to not believe because you just don't want to believe. There's now no reasonable doubt for Thomas. He must believe that Jesus is alive. He must believe that Jesus has resurrected. So Thomas responds to him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said, now I want to point out to you, this is beyond what the disciples said when they saw Jesus resurrected. Now we don't know, at least what's recorded, right? We don't have a record of them, but here we have Thomas making a grand statement about who Jesus is in verse 28. My Lord and my God. He is making a statement, not just you are my leader, but you are my God. You are my God. Whew! He has gone way beyond just you are the Messiah. He's gained an understanding of what that means now. Jesus said, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. And boy, here's the great blessing, right? Because we don't have that option. We weren't there. We don't know those people. We're not friends with them. We didn't see the resurrected Christ. And the reality is that 99.99999% of people who are believers in Jesus never saw him resurrected from the dead. We have seen the evidence, we've heard the stories, and we believe the evidence removes all reasonable doubt. This is not blind faith. This is reasonable conclusion from all the evidence that Jesus must have risen from the dead, and therefore he is God. We come to the same conclusion that Thomas did because the evidence is there. So that conclusion leads us to nothing less than he is Lord and he is God. I hope that's helped as you prepare to teach. Thank you for teaching. God bless you for that. Looking forward to the last Sunday coming up this next week. We'll have that, and then we're headed off into the summer quarter. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, share. We will see you next time.